On July 9th, 2022, Black Summoner was released. It is a typical seasonal anime made to promote its manga serialization, and to save time in making it, they animated its fight scenes in CGI, as if someone took a pair of scissors to cut the anime in half and insert something reminiscent to a video game cutscene in between. Then there are shows like My Dress Up Darling, where the CGI sequences are interwoven so well that, as a viewer, I could not tell at times if what I was watching was hand drawn or not. I mean, looking back, we've come a long way from its first use in Golo 13 in the helicopter scene. But compared to now, it's a night and day difference in just how far this technology has matured and become so prevalent. Though, all the same, we heard it said 100 times that CGI ruins anime, it degrades the quality, it breaks the immersion. But what does that even mean, to ruin anime? What is that thing that CGI takes away from anime? What is anime? In 1914, Gertie the Dinosaur was released in America using hand-drawn images sequenced in order to give the appearance of movement, animation. Since Photoshop wasn't invented yet, each frame had to be entirely redrawn onto the next frame, which is why it looks so jumpy. Layer-based animation, the Photoshop equivalent, wouldn't be invented until 1 year later. 2 years later, in 1917, Japan made its first ever animation. This used multiple layers to separate the background from its characters, and it's made in Japan. But why is it when we look up the first anime ever made, people settle on Astro Boy, made in 1963, 46 years later? Why is this not anime and Astro Boy is? Semantically, anime is just the abbreviation of animation, coined by Japanese people in the mid to late 20th century to identify a subgenre of animation. Though that's not the point, since somewhere in that time period between 1917 and 1963, anime was invented. Breaking the fourth wall, if you thought this feels very similar to a Vsauce video right now, you're right. Because in a way, what I'm doing, mimicking something that already exists, is kind of what Japan did starting out when they made animation, but more generally a lot of other things too, like trains, telegrams, government, and even clothes. To put a name to it, the Meiji Restoration. It was a rapid scramble to reorganize Japanese society to become up to speed with the rest of the world in response to the genuine fear that Japan would fall prey to Western colonization like China, the Philippines, India, and so many others. This time period lasted for 44 years, between 1868 and 1912. Prior to that, since 1603 in fact, Japan was closed off from all outside contact. A hikikomori Japan keeping tradition with its modern self. So when Matthew Perry reopened it in 1853, they found a perfectly preserved medieval society existing out of time in a world where trains connected the coasts of America. Messages could be sent by the telegraph, steamboats, steel, capitalism, and the Industrial Revolution already happened. A Japanese citizen who grew up in Tokyo during this time period was quoted saying something to the effect of, "It feels as if I have been alive for 400 years. Okay, so what does this have to do with anime? Well, directly to it, nothing, but this was the climate, this was the setting that anime grew up in, this was anime's origin story. Because you can't just modernize a whole country in 44 years that it took the rest of the world 265 years to do, right? Come on guys, some things had to have fallen through the cracks. One of those things was Japan's entertainment industry, because there just wasn't that government-sponsored seed money like there was for trains or education. So starting out, early Japanese animations were done usually by a single person or a small team at their own private expense. Their skills at drawing movement, characters, and even music choice would be influenced by imported foreign animations and technologies like Disney or the Warner Brothers. But even when Japan replicated the technologies and techniques found in Western-style animation, there was still something that they couldn't shake. There was still something that made their works feel like a copy and not something that they could call their own.
Imamura Taihei, a Japanese film critic at the time, or should I say the film critic, because his thoughts and work were so influential, Studio Ghibli reprinted one of his books well after he passed. He said this about Japanese animation: it lacked inner purpose. He was perplexed on how Disney, with his crude drawings, can generate so much emotion, so much life into his cartoons. Really, what that was to him was how they decomposed movements of actual people or things and recreated them in their work. They did this by looking at photographs for reference, recording things that they would animate, or use rotoscoping. Rotoscoping is filming a person move, then projecting each image of that film reel on a canvas to paint over. Why imagine how something would move when you can just draw it over frame by frame? This gave life to the characters on screen. It gave it an inner purpose you cannot simply replicate from imagining how things would move in your head, which was Imamura Taihei's critique about Japanese animation. But it wasn't just that. Rotoscoped animations have a distinct feel from non-rotoscoped ones that just don't capture that sense of life like Disney. Because what Disney figured out was not in creating what was shown on screen, but actually what wasn't. It was the invisible decision he and his animators made frame by frame. They would publish a book on this in 1981, codifying these things into the 12 principles of animation, effectively making guidelines on how to draw movement on screen and how many frames to use for them. The YouTuber you're watching right now has the best in-depth explanation on this I could find, and a link of his video will be in the description.
Basically, Japan didn't figure out animation yet, and its citizens didn't care to watch them either. Actually for a while it was cheaper for Japanese movie theaters to dub existing foreign animations into Japanese than to license Japanese-made ones.
Even as we see Japan cultivate its skills for the next 20 years, there is still an overwhelming interest in foreign animations. This is why Mitsuo Seo was quoted in 1936 saying, "We, Japan, can never make good animated films since it's not a profitable business at all." But back on track for anime, Japan kind of woke up to this. They eventually figured it out on how to capture the inner purpose missing from their works before, but it would not happen until Japan entered its villain arc in World War II. Naturally, you wouldn't trade with your enemies in war, and that's what Japan did. In 1939, they passed a law putting an embargo on importing Western films into the country. Snow White, first screened in 1937 in America, would not be shown to the Japanese public until 1958, 21 years later. Their government-mandated propaganda, culture films, to be played in theaters before every movie, and this gave their animation industry the budget, the stimmy check, to take Japan from small studios to assembly line Disney-style production. Highly skilled teams came out of this who developed a visual style to fit the requirements from the animation the Japanese military ordered. The accurate depiction of all weapons and vehicles as they would be in real life, being entertaining, and recounting all of Japan's wartime victories. That guy, Mitsuo Seo, back in 1936 saying we, Japan, can never make good animated films because it's not a profitable business at all, was now commissioned by the Japanese government to make films on wartime exploits. He would go on to make the film that would inspire Tetsuya Osamu, the creator of Astro Boy, the quote-unquote first anime, the film that would inspire him to do so, Momotaro's Sea Eagles. Now, for Western audiences, it's pretty weird to see an anime about Pearl Harbor getting bombed, but when you look past that, we have the visual cues of anime we can recognize. Cartoony animal characters and hyper-realistic machines, all carried in a semi-serious documentary-style package. all the young kids who watched this show would go on to emulate and make their own works based off of it once they got in the industry. This was the first anime. And after the war, once TVs became prevalent, it would serve as the medium for all future anime to spread and become what it is today. The workers who made it would reapply these skills they learned in other post-war works and inadvertently create a visual genre that kids would grow up watching on their Saturday cartoons, then enter the industry to go on and replicate. So, Astro Boy would be the first anime that aired on TV, but it wasn't the first, it wasn't the seed that started it. I guess you could say it wasn't the bombs that made anime, but the embargo. Sorry for the crude joke. And look, this style would go on and mature. Archetypes, patterns, the way things would be shown on screen would be because the technology used to make it would basically be the same stuff used in Momotaro's Sea Eagles.
Thomas Lamar, a professor at the University of Chicago, is an American-Canadian Japanologist. He noticed these patterns in 2D works and more broadly grouped anime and cartoons under his umbrella term, animatism. Basically, because anime is made on layers, people have a preference to capitalize on the shifting of those layers to give the appearance of movement. Movement into depth, cinematism would not be used often, or at least very sparingly because it would be so labor-intensive to do so.
This is why we see most trains move side to side on screen and not towards the camera like they would in real-life movies. He himself actually made a video essay on this topic, and a link will be in the description. This is what anime is, and it was that way for a long time, until it wasn't. CGI changed the game. It threw away the point of classifying cinematism and animatism, since you can easily recreate those scenes in anime using CGI. It freed up animators for more scenes to explore new and exciting camera angles. The intro to Spy X Family would not be possible without CGI. It would just be too difficult to do in traditional anime. Character designs that would be scrapped or drawn in less detail can be fully realized in CGI. But naturally, for us, the viewers, without these fancy words of cinematism or animatism, we can easily tell these two styles are different, because most anime are still overwhelmingly hand-drawn, and when we see CGI break those hand-drawn rules, we can tell on an unconscious level that something is different. Not just that, even looking at how animators draw movement on screen, CGI's movements are based on a computer generating it. So really, CGI conflicts on the invisible decision-making that people make frame by frame in anime. But it's here to stay, and we have the next generation of people going into the industry who grew up with CGI in their anime. It has improved a lot, and it will continue to improve, where we can have anime fully made in CGI that we can't even tell if it was hand-drawn or not, like Dress Up Darling, but better.
Back to the question, what is anime? Is it the visual cues, or is it the physical process in which it's created? I mean, is it like the ship of Theseus, where you start out with the original ship, that being the original way anime was created, but you replace it piece by piece over time, where no original parts remain, like it being CGI? Or is it more like a gradient of technologies that go in and out of fashion? Like the same way people went from writing letters to sending emails to texting. Anime is without a doubt changing. But will the art form cease to exist at some point as new technologies replace the way we consume media like VR? Or will fragments of it live on in other media as it evolves and changes shape? Regardless of that, I feel when people say 20 years from now that they watch anime, it will not mean the same thing as when I say right now that I watch anime. And Shinji still needs to get in the damn robot. Thank you for watching.